The Half-Life series is full of sinister stories of humanity's destruction at the hands of the Combine and the other species that arrived on Earth during and after the Resonance Cascade. These egregious and horrific actions of the Combine left an irreversible effect on Earth and the population. However, some of these actions were worse than others. In one of the darkest tales I have told on this channel, a device designed by the Combine had a staggering effect on the current population of Earth and the future generations to come. Playgrounds lay empty and graffiti displayed just how broken humanity was. In the beta, this story was considered by some to be even darker and grittier. Yes, this includes beta content, so I had to say it, dark and gritty. What happened to the children of Half-Life in the retail version? How different was the beta? And how did the youngest Resistance fighters, human Combine units, and residents of the Combine cities become the last generation? In this video, we explore the lore and story behind the children of the Half-Life series. The Combine's invasion of planet Earth changed everything. With use of the portal storms that swept across the globe, the Combine came from the skies and conquered the planet in just 7 hours. This was the largest loss of human life in all history, as Earth's armies came together to fight back against this alien force. Despite their efforts, they were no match against the mighty force of the Combine Empire. At the end of the 7-hour war, a deal was made by a representative of humanity, Dr. Wallace Breen, and the Combine. The human species would agree to submit to this alien collective in return for their lives. While this deal had been made, the Combine saw these humans as nothing more than an infestation on the planet. With a new planet under their control, the Combine began to adapt Earth so that they could use the pieces they needed to improve their armies. The oceans were drained and sent to other Combine-controlled planets that required the water. The human population were essentially captured and transported across the planet into controlled settlements. It was in these cities that the Combine and the humans who had chosen to work with them could monitor and instill fear into the general population. The novel 1984 by George Orwell had been written just about 50 years before, and their existence had become the dark, dystopian reality Orwell had written about. The regions outside of the cities became home to new, hostile creatures that had been pulled from their own worlds during the portal storms. The human population were treated like cattle with the threat of awful treatment if they rebelled. Yet, within these cities, they were kept safe by their alien overlords from the dangers of the wasteland. There were, however, a select few that went into hiding and refused to submit to the Combine. This was the birth of a resistance. Within the cities, propaganda lined the walls and screens, and only horror waited for any who thought about a way to get a better life. Occasionally, those who rebelled were lined up against a wall and shot one by one, a clear message to everyone around. The human population lived in a society of fear, and although the Combine had done a pretty good job in the control of this species, they had one more malicious act up their sleeves. In what is considered one of their most atrocious displays of power and control, the Combine designed and activated a suppression field. In essence, it prohibited the formation of the protein change required in the process of embryonic development. This field encompassed the whole of the planet, and without the ability to even develop embryos, one of the earliest stages of pregnancy, no one could get pregnant. Whether the unborn children survived the activation of the suppression field is unknown. What is known is that the human children on the planet would not only grow up on a Combine-controlled Earth, but they would also be the last generation as designed by their alien overlords. It has also been suggested that this device was designed specifically to target just the human embryonic development on the planet. As of now, this has not been confirmed. Despite this, over the years of Combine occupation, the rest of the wildlife were mostly wiped out as a result of the hostile wasteland and the alien creatures that had claimed it as their own. This last generation of children grew up in an Orwellian society of fear as they were bombarded with a Combine way of life. This was normal for them. They had not experienced a life of freedom that their parents had. The playgrounds once full of laughter and joy lay empty and became a haunting reminder of the freedom humanity once had. Under the constant control and monitoring of the Combine, the last generation had very limited options, 3 or 4 at the most. The first, a life of fear and isolation in Combine housing. The second, the life of a voluntary Combine unit. It would make sense that more of the children, once grown, would feel more aligned to their alien overlords as the propaganda, indoctrination, and normality of this world would have been the standard for them. The rewards that came with this collaboration with the Combine also made this line of work worthwhile. Better housing and additional food. As members of the human Combine police force, the civil protection simply upheld this society of fear. Another reward also offered non-mechanical reproductive simulation. This suggested that humanity may have also been prohibited from any activity of sexual nature without the consent of the Combine despite their inability to reproduce. The final likely path was that of a resistance fighter. This was by far the most dangerous. Alex Vance was one of these. Alex grew up as the daughter of the leader of the resistance, Dr. Eli Vance, and over the years, Alex lived within resistance bases and learned everything she could from her father. She was taught about the methods the Combine used to indoctrinate the population and how the world functioned before. The man who had essentially betrayed his own species, Dr. Wallace Breen, had been declared as interim administrator of Earth by the Combine just after the invasion. It was his job to keep his species in line. Through what were called Breencasts, Breen spoke out to the cities and did his part to indoctrinate and calm his subjects. The administrator often stated that the citizens wrote him letters with concerns and questions about the Combine rule. Whether these letters were actually sent is unknown, but he did know how to speak to the masses. 20 years after the Combine invasion, and also since the last child had been born, Breen claimed over a Breencast that a concerned citizen had written to him about their worries of their inability to reproduce. Their right to have children had been taken away from them 2 decades before. Without it, the species would eventually die out. As a well-trained politician, Breen simply avoided the question completely and instead used it as an opportunity to push his own agenda. Breen explained that the Combine knew best and that the field would be deactivated when humanity proved that they no longer needed it. At this point, the youngest person on the planet was around 20 years old. This was what the resistance wanted to fight against. It was also said that although the field stopped pregnancy, it did not stop many from trying. Across the cities, the empty, eerie playgrounds just acted as a reminder of the power of the Combine. Some say that if they stood in just the right spot in one of these ancient locations, they could hear the screams of children that had once enjoyed these places. These screams could also be interpreted as the terror of children as the Combine invaded. Regardless of what the screams meant, they were simply a memory of the old world. The Combine had shown their powerful hand, and it would take someone or something with a much stronger will to change things. The retail version of the story of the children of Half-Life was sinister. The beta, however, is much darker. The Combine invasion of Earth followed a fairly similar path. The human population were moved into cities, they were monitored by the Civil Protection, the oceans were drained, the land outside the cities also became a wasteland, but the suppression field was not created. To modify the planet, many factories were constructed across the globe. One introduced changes to the atmosphere and another even controlled the weather. These regions were controlled by Stalkers. There were also other factories that required other types of workers, children. The Combine were a multi-dimensional army and required the mass production of weaponry, armor, and the various other cogs that allowed the army to function. Up until the 1930s, the majority of Earth's countries used child labor in factories, mines, and other dangerous locations. This was because of their smaller stature, flexibility, and compliance. It appeared that the Combine had a similar idea. Likely just like the Victorian era of the UK and the other tough years of the other countries around that age, children as young as 5 were utilised in Combine factories to climb into the machinery to keep them functioning. They retrieved materials that had fallen behind or to the bottom of the machines, and they even operated them. All of this while under the surveillance of civil protection units equipped with firearms. This was extremely dangerous work. Just in the factories, the machines were large, overpowering, and deadly if used incorrectly. Yet, the children did not have a choice. It would be safe to say that the mortality rate of the children of Earth increased dramatically under Combine occupation. The Combine, of course, did not view this in the way a human would. The smallest of humanity were still human, still a part of the infestation on the planet. Approximately 10 years after the Combine invasion, one factory in the industrial district of City 17 was observed to have been designed to construct cremators. Essentially, Combine janitors that kept the streets clean and safe from biological waste and threats. Just like most Combine activities, the entire process of the creation of these entities is unknown, but what is known is that an assembly line was used to create the heads of the cremators. On this line, miserable children appear to craft the cremator heads with the use of a furnace. In a building next to this, children were observed operating machinery as pistons swung aggressively within the region, machinery that could easily injure them, or worse, if they were not careful. These are just 2 of the known factories in the City 17 region. It is very likely that there were so many more. The use of children as a younger workforce with advanced, dangerous machinery was horrific. As the suppression field did not exist in the beta, it also means that the Combine would have had a constant wave of new workers year after year until they were too old to complete their tasks. Moving back over to the retail version of Half-Life 2, it has to be asked, was child labor also used? By the time Dr. Gordon Freeman returned to Earth after his time in stasis, he barely recognized the planet. A lot had changed in 20 years. The youngest child was now an adult at 20 years old. It has not been confirmed whether or not they were used by the Combine in the earliest years. Gordon did not encounter the industrial district on his journey or any cremators. He did, however, see the head of a cremator in a jar in Dr. Eli Vance's lab. Only in this retail version, even Eli did not know what it was. A member of his resistance had simply discovered it out in the wasteland. This suggests that cremators did exist in this version, they were just never seen. Graffiti on the walls told the story of soldiers that had attempted to protect babies. The soldier as a representation of war and death, and the child as the representation of new life. Sadly, new life had been taken from them. There were no children to play in the playgrounds, the swings still, the roundabout stable, and locks that had been untouched in decades. The Combine had also chosen not to remove the playgrounds. This was either because they simply did not care, or to leave a reminder for all around just how powerful they were. They had taken the ability to reproduce. Several days after Gordon's return, an uprising began with Freeman as the symbol of their revolution. In this war, the Resistance took back City 17, the home of the Administrator, and as a result, the Resistance members, refugees, and human population evacuated. Then, the Combine headquarters of the city, the Citadel, fell. This was an iconic moment in human history. According to Dr. Isaac Kleiner, the collapse of this large and powerful structure had deactivated all of the citadels across the planet. It had cut off the Combine's connection to Earth, and it had also deactivated the global suppression field. Having observed this change, Dr. Kleiner hijacked the Braincast system. He broadcast the information that the suppression field was inactive and that everyone who had escaped the city should give serious consideration in doing their part for the revival of the species. Upon hearing this, Alex Vance asked Gordon, "Is Dr. Kleiner really telling everyone to get busy?" After Alex and Gordon escaped from City 17 and arrived at the White Forest Resistance base, Eli also suggested to his daughter that he wanted grandchildren. And who better to father his grandchild than the symbol of the entire revolution, Dr. Gordon Freeman. The deactivation of the Combine Super Portal meant that this Universal Union could no longer access Earth. Combine forces still remained on the planet. The war was not over and the Resistance still had work to do. Just like many of Valve's projects, the end of this story has not been written. I hate to say it, but it may never be. From how Half-Life 2 Episode 2 concluded, it is likely that approximately 9 months after the deactivation of the suppression field, the first human child was born after 20 years. If the Resistance were able to completely remove the threat of the Combine from Earth, this new generation of children would grow up in a new era of freedom, the restructure of society, and safety. If they failed, however, this new generation would once again become the last for a long time and suffer the same fate their parents had. Until Valve releases a new episode of this dark tale, the future of the children of Half-Life is unknown. The suppression field has always been one of the most haunting and darkest parts of the Half-Life series. It is mentioned by Breen as soon as Gordon exits the train station, and the visual storytelling of that abandoned playground really nails in what had been taken from humanity. It is because of this way of visual storytelling and smaller background details that Half-Life is still popular so many years later. Even now when I play through the series, I find things that I have not seen before, and it paints an even clearer picture of a Combine-controlled Earth. Throughout this script, I wanted to explore the retail version and the beta version, but I could not decide which was actually worse, no life at all or a life of tortured servitude. I guess that it is something I should ask you. The beta has so much fascinating content that I am slowly working through. I absolutely love the differences between them. This topic, the children of Half-Life, is one of the darkest I have explored. I think there are a few more to explore like this too. That was everything I wanted to cover this week, so please like the video if you liked it, please share it with other Half-Life fans, and most importantly, subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Finally, I would like to thank my gold tier patrons and channel members: Jonas, Lewis, Queen Arby, Fluffy the Dragon, Chicken Guy 791, Ruben Mendoza, Duke, Toadnut, Oren X, Azu, Karatana, AJ, Verona, Comfy, BG Games, Apravis, Arnis, Blades of Glory, Cole Sherman, Yali Rodriguez, and Nabar. Which fate was worse, not existing at all or a life of servitude? Which version did you prefer, and what would you like me to cover next? Please let me know in the comments below. This is where our story ends. Check back next week for a new one.